company culture. How do we define company culture? I looked online and here was a definition that I saw that I really like. Company culture can be defined as a set of shared values, goals, attitudes, and practices that characterize an organization. Sounds good, right? Until you really break it down, and let's look at the first one, a set of shared values. Values shared by whom? Who gets to speak into those values? How are they defined? How are they communicated? How do those show up at work? Well, company culture is of huge importance. It gets a lot of airplay, gets a lot of discussion, and it's often used to describe really at its essence who fits in and who doesn't, who gets to play in the sandbox and who gets left out of the sandbox. And so the question really emerges in a time where there's such heightened awareness in a really great way about the importance of being inclusive. Can company culture, where we're defining who's in and who's out, how does that mesh with inclusivity goals? And I think they can coexist, but you're going to have to really think through how your intentions show up in terms of the outcomes. Now, I'm going to make an assumption that there's nobody watching this video right now that doesn't care about inclusion. I mean, by definition, we're talking about inclusion. Obviously, you care. And if you had intentions to be not inclusive, you wouldn't be watching this video. But sometimes, even though we have great intentions, it doesn't always map to the right outcomes. And I see this time and time again where we use vague words to talk about company culture, or we haven't taken the time to really articulate that culture and make sure that it is a shared understanding in a meaningful and appropriate way across the organization. Sometimes the term culture fit just becomes a bumper sticker or a lazy explanation for, I just don't like this person. I just don't want to hire this person. And so we need to do a couple of things. First of all, I think the fix is easy. The fix, it comes from exposing your policies and your practices to bright sunlight. Take a look, put on paper, in words, what is our culture? So for example, one of the first definitions we heard of culture was shared values. What are our truly shared values as a company? Not just kind of what we feel our values are, but what are we willing to put on paper and say our shared values are? Really look at it with our eyes and use some intellectual rigor to say, is that true? Is that true for us? Is it so true for us that we will be willing to hire for this, that we'd be willing to fire for this? Who gets left out when we define our values in this way? Really asking those questions to make sure that we're willing to stand behind the things that we say matter most. The other way to address this is to make sure that we have rigor in our decision making and not allow bumper sticker phrases like, I just don't think he's a good fit. I don't think she'd fit in here. Why? Based on what? What gave you that impression? Is there a different way that we could measure that to make sure that we're really right? And maybe they aren't a culture fit, but would they add something to the culture? Could they bring more to the culture? Because culture is an evolving, growing, living organism that's going to shift with every hire that you make in your organization. So is it possible and is it important to define your culture? I think so. Inclusion doesn't mean that there's no boundary lines and that it's a no holds barred game, but we want to make sure that whatever practices we're employing, that it's really opening the most doors for the most people, and that we look at our culture as an evolving thing that can get better, stronger, and grow with time. So culture and inclusion can absolutely coexist. Like all employment practices, they just benefit from revisiting from time to time to make sure that our good intentions are truly mapping to great outcomes.